7, 8, and 9. Okay. So some units have been skipped because it contained information which was largely there in other units. Again, as I said, when you skim the units, look at keywords, and that will enable you to construct your answers in your examination. So let's look at unit 12. And before we start, as I always do, let's do a recap. Trafficking is a $150 billion industry according to ILO in 2024. And these are estimates. And there are 49.6 million people in modern slavery worldwide, with 35% of them children. Now, these are estimates. These estimates are based on some modeling, based on some identification. Actual industry in terms of value or numbers may can be totally off the mark. Recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, receipt of person by improper means for unlawful purpose of profit. The whole trafficking industry is for profit. So it is another one of the capitalist model where the product is human beings. Whereas smuggling involves illegal facilitation of migrants' entry into another country for financial gain. Now, smuggling, typically at the end of the smuggling, the person who's smuggled is typically let go unless there is a dead bondage. In some cases, the smuggled individual is trafficked, but in larger cases, it's just the smuggling. Traffic, on the other hand, is by force, deceit, partial or fully, using that person for a slavery kind of a situation. Criminals and criminal gangs exploit human desire. So migrants are most vulnerable, but does not mean only migrants. Any person at any moment of time in a state of vulnerability is a prey to criminal and criminal gangs for trafficking. Victims may or may not be migrants. Quickly summing 1 and 2, enactment of several international and national legislations aimed at tackling the problem continues to pose, because as we are reading in MDI 7 and 8, because of informalization, because of pushing the wages down, the labor, especially the migrant labor, is extremely vulnerable because subsistence is not there, which leads to them falling prey for traffickers. Increased prevalence of trafficking rate is an acknowledged problem both global and nationally. It's a violation of fundamental rights, fundamental human rights. There are different types of trafficking: forced labor, sex trafficking, child organ, beggary, child soldiers, etc. Various factors include poverty, education, weak legal systems. We have gone through this. If you feel I am going fast, please slow me down. Mobility of people, another aspect has been a high level of mobility of capital, transnational character of industrial pollution, devaluation of human labor. Inevitably, there is a devaluation of human labor. Increased mass level migration, creating a market for female labor, bringing women in the realm of paid labor, also making them vulnerable. Socioeconomic factors we have seen: economic poverty, economic vulnerability, education, right skills, gender discrimination, educational and opportunity. The more the barriers which get created by state or non-state actors, the more illegal means are adopted by people to circumvent or overcome their socioeconomic factors. Then there is a demand factor. Demand becomes a major issue. So in case you have a short note or a question on how does demand help in trafficking, talk about the demand for cheap labor, talk about the demand for cheap products, which typically get global production networks to to push or exploit human beings, which leads to human trafficking, continue to grow in developing world with unequal economic development. People remain disposable. That is the crux of it. Then, to add to it, regional conflicts not abated, global warming, natural disasters will aggravate, and hence human trafficking, a defining problem for the 21st century. enormous scale worldwide, only a fraction of the victims gets identified. We have seen in early units why identification is difficult. There is a big problem in terms of training of law enforcement, of practitioners. How do you identify? There are biases. 0.4% of the victims were able to be identified. In Unit 8, we looked at transportation. Land routes are the easiest. In fact, if you see a couple of serials, there was this serial called The Mentalist, very famous serial, Hollywood serial, Mentalist. In one of the later episodes of the later season, there was particularly two, three episodes on trafficking, where these girls are, deceited by these modeling agencies or modeling agents, and then they are abducted and then transferred through container ships to Colombia from the US, and how these guys are able to follow and able to help retrieve the girls. In fact, a part of the trafficking also involves harvesting organs of these girls. So a lot of serials, especially American serials, do talk about trafficking. You look at the fact that Indian movies, I haven't come across any Indian movie or a series where there was trafficking as an issue, even though there is a large trafficking which happens. Maybe one of the factors is because I do not watch enough of Indian series or serials or movies to actually know, but Hollywood does bring up this topic quite often. Internet has changed the modus operandi of traffickers, considering it's anonymous, virtual ability to reach from any part. You don't need to cross talk. In fact, internet has allowed human trafficking to happen without moving people across borders. In Unit 9, we looked at victim identification. How do you identify a victim by relevant practitioners? Can be reactive when the victim identifies as a traffic victim and seeks assistance, or identification is proactive when the practitioners identify. Many a times, people try and identify themselves as a victim when they want to, take asylum, or there are other things. So basically, a lot of complexity is there in victim identification. It's a challenging task. First identified by local police officer, member of community service organization. With the victim, it is important to educate. And unless they are educated, there are all these biases. Then, of course, there is this heavy bias for sexual exploitation. So other exploitations are not normally detected. Again, there is a bias for women's sexual exploitation. So men, boys, LGBTQ is not looked at. Traffic victims' experience of identification and structural and institutional challenges. So, if there is an experience where somebody is, hassled in terms of if they are identified, or the fact there is the scare of law enforcement in terms of deportation and etc., it complicates the identification process. So, let's look at identifying of the offender. Indicators in different exploitative situations. We are not looking at indicators of different exploitative situations, but we are looking at indicators which point to, in terms of offenders. Okay, summation of Unit 11, locating and identifying victims of human trafficking is much more complex. We've already looked at that. Can be done by outreach program of NGOs, SOS hotlines, state agencies, staff of NGOs. So a whole lot of people who come at various stages of contact with traffic victims need to be educated, need to be upgraded, need to be made aware. Uh, States that indicators should be taken as a flexible instrument, case by case assessment. I think there was one slide which, uh, again, this is summation of Unit 11 can vary, such as 6 star. Again, these indicators vary based on the type of trafficking or exploitation. presence of one or more indicators does not necessarily confirm human traffic, but raise suspicion. So that's where training and upgradation of skills and usage of tools is required. Common indicators: sign of physical abuse, restricted movement, isolation, exploitative working conditions, control of finances, psychological trauma, etc., etc. This we have all done it in the earlier classes. Profiling human traffickers is a again, as identification of victim is a complex phenomena, identification of a trafficker also is a complex phenomena. And remember, because of the nature of trafficking, especially between countries, there are different laws, there are different ways to understand it, there are different people involved, and hence collaboration become. Now we have understood one thing basically in the whole migration and diaspora subject, that unless world bodies, world governments, state, non-state actors, NGOs, etc., collaborate, it is extremely difficult to solve this complex problem of migration, of diaspora, of trafficking, of production, labor, migrant labor, and etc., etc. Systematically gathering and analyzing data, identifying patterns, trends, and so again, another thing which comes out of this, like what has been coming out of MDI 7 and 8, is unless there is a systemic research, and this research typically has to be done by research agencies, by researchers, by media people, unless there are information upgradation of what is happening in terms of modus operandi, we are all swimming in the dark. Because there is an old saying, unless you can measure, you can't manage. So we are trying to manage things without measuring them. Identify patterns, trends, and characteristics associated with individuals. Is to collect and analyze intelligence from various sources. So, for example, look at the fact, uh, at any moment when transportation of traffic people happen, they would stop somewhere. They would go past a place. They will use a transport. There are transporters, there are truckers, there are containers, container freighters, there are dock workers, there are religious organizations. For example, churches, temples, gurdwaras, mosques. There are some, because at the end of the day, if human beings are moving, they would come in contact with other human beings. Law enforcement operations, victim testimonies, under. So there needs to be some amount of data which is needs to be collected, and then there is standard operating procedure of how do you identify, and best practices. Unfortunately, those best practices are not documented and shared, or they are documented and shared, but they go out of out of current in terms of currency. New practices come in. Identify key players in trafficking networks such as recruiters, traffickers. It is a complex operation. And inevitably, one way to do it is always follow the money trail, because obviously the money is flowing from some place to someplace else. Perpetrators based on motivations, roles, organization structures, and method of operation. Support law enforcement, researchers, NGOs understanding how different offenders operate and how best to intervene or prosecute. Are these offenders individual criminals? Are they small level criminals? Are they transnational corporations which are operating? For example, we have looked at the fact that because of this volatility of labor and the informalization of labor, there are these recruitment companies and agents will become front for traffickers. Now, unless somebody is looking into their financials, looking at how many people they are recruiting, how they are recruiting, this slippage will happen under the radar. So there are individual opportunistic offenders. They act alone, limited resources, financial gain with criminal acts, exploit personal relationships such as romantic partners or family, boyfriend coercing. That's so I these are various typologies. So if you get a question in terms of how do you identify human trafficking offenders, you can write upon their typologies. They are organized crime groups. Definite roles of recruiter, transporter, enforcer, exploiter, large scale profit, use of fraud, corruption, document forgery, smuggling networks. Syndicate trafficking people for forced labor in agriculture or construction. So the other day, what Sophia talked about Romania, there is a possibility that a lot of people out there are trafficked people for construction. Familial traffickers, family members involved in trafficking their own relatives. In fact, more often than not, we have seen that the trafficker knows the target or the suspected individual, has a direct contact, coerce or sell children or spouses into labor or sexual exploitation, parents selling child for labor or sexual exploitation, and survival in the context of poverty or drug addiction. State sponsored or corrupt officials, government agents or military personnel involved in trafficking, where there are military bases. A lot of trafficking happens around military bases. Political or military advantage, forced labor or profit, legal authority coerce individuals, manipulate immigration or labor system, forced conscription or state sanctioned forced labor. There are enough examples of state sanctioned forced labor where the state is complicit. Then there are corporate or employee based offenders. What we talked about, recruiters. Now, with a lot of labor in the migrant category, in a contractual category, and all these contractors pick up labor, it's very easy to exploit worker under the guise of legal employment. Profit through wage, theft, bonded labor, or exploitative contracts. Confiscate document, restrict movement, impose debt bondage. Then there is guerrilla pimps. Use violence, intimidation, dominance to control, power, control, financial gain, beating, threat, psychological abuse, abduct, brutalize victims into compliance. Not too many, but there are. Then there is the new category with internet called the cyber traffickers. Online through recruitment, grooming, and exploitation. Use social media, job scams, dark web platforms. Target youth for webcam, sex trafficking. So I'm sure all of you would have at any moment of time got this high from some unknown person on WhatsApp or any other messaging platform or social media, where the profile, if you're a guy, the profile is of a female. If you're a female, the profile is of this guy. And you initiate a conversation. These are ways to recruit. There was this case of multiple married men getting where a WhatsApp conversation was initiated, followed by sexting, followed by videos, and then the persons are blackmailed, which could finally lead to something else. Cult or ideological offenders use ideology, religion, or cult structures to justify trafficking. For example, as a part of the culture, countries like Nigeria, there is almost a religious or cult witch doctors who initiate women into trafficking, and you cannot come out because they are told that if they displease the god or the witch or doctor or anything, then tragedy will befall on them, and mysteriously people of their families die, obviously by traffickers. So that cult or that storytelling of that cult spreads. Power, belief based control, labor, sexual exploitation. Then, of course, there is religious indoctrination, use followers for forced labor or sex. We have seen enough of these cults in terms of sexual cults, forced labor, and so on and so forth. Trafficking is not an only male profession. There are women also involved. Their roles vary. In some criminal groups, women play a significant role in charge of managing trafficking of women from Nigeria to Italy, with men serving in secondary roles. So again, it all depends. There are some trafficking networks run totally by women. A function of female trafficker is to help the male, leaving her at the margins of criminal activity, regularly utilized to recruit victims for their capacity to develop confidence with the victim they are recruiting efficiently. So, like any other business, women become a part and parcel of the criminal gang or individual traffickers. The women, because of their ability to to gather trust with a victim, are a lot of them are recruiters. Some traffickers are former victims themselves. Some countries, a madam in destination countries supervises, control, organizes girls for sexual action. Such madams have been a subject of, as victims themselves. So once they have been exploited for a certain period of time, what we had earlier defined as happy victims, where the victim becomes recruiters. They have been subject of, they have been victims themselves. It is better to continue in that profession rather than leave, because to find a new profession is always difficult. Once debt has been paid, they in turn use the same methods to make money. Fear of threatened or actual violence and a graduation of their role within the trafficking enterprise. There's a relationship of dependence, what is called the Stockholm Syndrome, where the victims identify with their captors' view of the world and grow sympathies to them. So again, there are multiple motivations, multiple people. Some could be low-level criminals, some could be transnational criminals. Situation of victim to trafficker can represent an improvement in circumstances. So if if you look at the Indian concept of karma, a bonded labor would automatically, most of the time, justify his or her being into bonded labor as a part of his karma, his or her karma. We have seen a lot of people, rather than show agency or fight a system, believe it on their karma. In the absence of other livelihood options with no scope to escape, would often graduate to the role of role of trafficker. So again, you have to look at the context, the situation, and based on that, one can figure out as to what it is. I hope I'm not going too fast, guys.
No, sir.
Okay. Characteristics and motivators of offenders. So again, as I said, all these bits and pieces, keywords you can use to, if there's a question on offenders, how will you identify an offenders, or what are the various methods to identify offenders? You can, if it's a long question, you can write their typologies. If it's a short question, you can write basically characteristics and motivations. Knowledge of both countries in which traffickers operate and their countries of nationality, insight into modus operandi, maybe significant when the recruiter speaks the same language, derives from the same culture as that recruited. It has to be, because unless you understand that culture, a person from outside will not do that, cannot do that. Crime groups established in diaspora communities have shown to maintain strong ethnic links with their state of origin. We have seen that diaspora organizations also facilitate trafficking. When spouse, partners, children, parents, and other relatives have been oblivious to the criminal activities of their relatives, which again we know there have been cases where the parents did not know what the children were doing on the internet, but were actually performing, sexual acts for traffickers. Families collaboratively engage in trafficking operations. Family networks. And now with internet and social media, the other day there was this Latino influencer model who was arrested for trafficking, because influencing is a thing, and you follow, or because there is this herd mentality on the internet, and today that fear of missing out, or FOMO, you do not know what you are going into. Practitioners profile offenders using a combination of investigative techniques, psychological assessment, criminological theory, and intelligence analysis. It's not a very straightforward deal to say that this person, you need to have evidence, because in an evidence-based scenario in the legal system or the judicial system, you need evidence. And law enforcement, NGO, and researcher understand offender behavior, networks, patterns. So what are the key profiling methods? So key profiling methods include behavior profiling, forensic psychology, and criminology. How the traffickers operate, how they recruit, how they use coercion, how they control between different type of traffickers in terms of recruiters, transporters, enforcers. And in all these, victim interviews help, talking to the victims. Because when a trafficker changes his modus operandi, it is only the victim who can update a practitioner. So what is called behavior profiling.
Sir?
Yes, Sanjeev.
Sir, indentured labor and Kangani type of labor, Kangani system.
Correct.
Can we consider it as a labor, human trafficking?
Or see, it was not in a technical term, it was not human trafficking, because both these involved contracts. But the fact is, the contracts were done with illiterate, unsuspecting people. Actually, it was slavery and a form of human trafficking. That time, the word human trafficking was not in currency, but it was bonded labor and it was a slavery. And remember, it came right after slavery was abolished. So the European colonizers needed another way for slavery in a legal way.
Yeah.
So it was trafficking. If you were looking at it from the trafficking point of view, it was trafficking.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir.
Then there is demographic and sociological profiling, gathering data on age, gender, nationality, socioeconomic status, criminal history, common socioeconomic backgrounds or migration patterns linked to traffickers, used in combination with victim profiling. And more often than not, the traffickers will come out of the same demographic and social, setup. So you study common petty criminals. If you look at them graduating or coming into money, or that's how the profiling is done. Modus operandi analysis, specific methods offenders use to carry out trafficking, how victims targeted and recruited, means of transportation and concealment, use of fake documents, use for linking cases for identifying trafficking networks. And this only can work when standard operating practices used by practitioners the world over, and the best practices are exchanged between various organizations. No particular country, because trafficking involves cross border, no particular country can act as a lone wolf. There has to be information sharing of intelligence. Network and link analysis. Intelligence software and databases map out criminal networks, identify key players, roles within the network, connections to other criminal activities. And more often than not, these criminals will do various activities, trafficking being one of them. And more often than not, a trafficking network will also possibly be also doing drug and arms trafficking. Financial and cyber profiling, money laundering patterns, bank transfers, cryptocurrency use, online ads, social media activity, online platforms traffickers use, escort websites, job scams. It is quite a back-breaking, research-based, analysis-based stuff to find out about traffickers. Victim testimonies and witness interviews, first-hand accounts providing insight into trafficker behavior and tactics, can reveal organization structures, routines, psychological manipulation used. See, in all these, the victim becomes a very important part because they have gone through it. So they will be able to tell the practitioners about, and there are enough victims who then come forward, become sources for all this information, and so on and so forth. Typology development, categories traffickers based on motivation and structures, individual, opportunistic, commercial, sexual exploitation. What is the kind they deal with? Geospatial profiling, maps, trafficking route, hotspots, transit points, identify regions with high level of recruitment, transit, and destination activity. So inevitably, if there's a natural disaster, that becomes a hot point for traffickers. There's an earthquake, there's a war, there's a civil conflict, it becomes a hotspot. So if I was to make a chart, that is how it happens. So in case you have a question which talks about offenders, in the profiling, you could talk about behavioral, demographic, modus operandi, network analysis, financial. And cyber, victim testimonies, typological, geospatial. Even if you miss out a couple, doesn't make a difference. You are able to construct an answer. Okay, so let's sum up. When it comes to human trafficking, creating a profile is a complex understanding of many traits, operational dynamics, many different types of human trafficking. Remember, there are many different types, and each would require a particular modus operandi. Advantages of vulnerability, dependent whether they are working independently or a part of the criminal network. So there might be very small petty level people who might feed onto bigger organizations. Offenders come from a wide range of backgrounds, make it difficult to establish a unique picture of them. They could be very much educated, they could be, they could be very respected people in the community, but actually they would be trafficking people. They would have an organization which is trafficking people. There are many cases where very respected people are actually the kingpins for trafficking organizations. Recruiters, transport experts are all separate jobs, contribute to the process of exploitation inside trafficking. And there are multiple, because there is so much of profit, there is, everybody wants to be a part of the cut. So profiling, process of gathering, analyzing data to identify patterns, trends, characteristics is profiling. Psychological profiling is to understand the mindset, motivation, personality traits. You would need a particular mindset for doing this work. For example, you would have a particular mindset if if you are a serial killer, and all these criminal activities, typically there are psychological profilers. If there is a serial rapist, a serial killer, there is a psychological profiling. So for example, if you have a pedophile, a person or a network, there are enough people who are attracted to young children. Now you need to have some difference in the way you look at the world to be a pedophile. And then there are criminal networks to cater to these pedophiles, and you need to have a different psychology to be catering to such kind of stuff. There are some references: offender and victim networks in human trafficking, Routledge. There's a UNODC has a lot of documentation. Let me stop here. Any questions? And again, as I said, when you are skimming through your units, understand the macro picture, then you will be able to fill the the micro components in it. Remember keywords, and then you'll be able to craft an answer. And now, as I said, with MDI 7 and 8 and 9, you could, typically take information from 7 and 8 in terms of informality, informal network economy, how people become vulnerable. This vulnerable is then exploited by criminal networks for trafficking. And then demand for cheaper labor, cheaper products, gets capitalists or people wanting to make more profit to employ traffickers, a trafficked individual, because then they don't have to pay and make more profits. Any questions?
So
yes, Vinod.
I don't know. I have to give you a little bit more context, so let me try to explain that and seek
Please.
your thoughts.
Please.
So I happened to be in an event a couple of days ago. It was about the girl who passed away in the knowledge economy, like sometime last year, due to work stress.
Okay.
And her mother was addressing a group, and she was mentioning that in today's, in some of those large organizations, kids are working like slaves. This is the term that she used, right? So is there a modern reference? I was just thinking, is that a modern reference to the erstwhile lot of trafficking, or like whatever the slavery stuff, sort of things that were happening, where you were physically moved from one place to another? Now you are like bonded in a place, and you have a lot of stress or whatever you are not able to manage, and you don't have time, and you don't control your time, and you don't have freedom. I mean, is that a comparison even possible? That's first question. And uh, because that's something that we see in the experience day to day, rather than, like as you said earlier, the trafficking or trafficking related stories or movies we probably don't get to see, but there are these sort of evidences that we see, but in a different format. What are your thoughts?
So, Vinod, one thing that you have to look, whenever you do with relation to trafficking, remember the trafficked individual has no agency. Today, the modern workplace, because of the way the production is shifting, and because of the way the production processes and the labor processes is shifting, is putting a lot of stress on people. And but the people still have an agency to say no and come out of it. A trafficked individual cannot say no and come out of it. Now, today, for example, the corporate jobs, or BPOs or KPOs, they would be individuals who do not have the power of agencies because they are constrained because of various conditions. For example, the parents have taken a loan for education. For example, you've taken an education loan, and something has happened or some tragedy happened, and you still have to pay the loan. You have no choice but to be in that situation. Then it's a different thing. But a large set of people, and then look at our needs. Our needs a lot of times are much more than what we what we require in terms of various things. So if we require transportation from going from point A to point B, rather than get a small car, we want an SUV because everybody around us, there is a lot of peer pressure. But however, saying that, remember, trafficking is some place where the individual does not have any agency. An agency to say no, an agency to be able to come out of the situation. In a modern workplace, the people still have an agency. So it cannot be linked to trafficking or slavery in a way. You know,
Sure, sir. Understood.
so you see, as soon as you have the power to say no, or the power to say I do not want to do it, it's not you're not in a slavery situation. Slavery, you have no power, because then either through coercion or through physical or psychological abuse, you cannot come out. Here you can come out. The girl had a power to say no. Now what was happened is, that girl that you are talking about, obviously there was this pressure by the peers, because she wanted to succeed. She wanted to show to her parents that she's succeeding, that success is measured in terms of your annual package, your success is measured in terms of the car that you have, or the house that you have, or the vacation that you take. Now you are taking on all that pressure on yourself, and and pushing yourself to a point where either the physical breaks or the mental breaks. And that's what we have seen. So inevitably, that thing of fear of missing out, we've seen that on social media. Everybody wants to show what a great life they are leading. Now inevitably, then it becomes a race to the to the end or to the bottom. Vinod,
Sure, sir.
do I make sense?
Yeah, I mean, those two, the comparison that you drew in terms of whether they have an option to say no and move out, right? I
Correct.
think that, yeah, that could have been exercised, and if that was the case, maybe it cannot be compared as a
Correct,
trafficking or a
correct.
slavery.
Because a trafficking cannot, or a slavery cannot say no.
Understood. Maybe it was more of an emotional response.
Possibly, because see, listen, and I don't. To youngsters today, it's an excellent time to be young today. As I always tell in my class, when I teach my undergrad and grad students, I say it's a great time to be young with the kind of options, with the kind of movements, with the kind of mobility. But it's a shitty time to be young because of the kind of all these options put so much of pressure on you. We had, when we were growing up, there were two options. So if you're a guy, you become an engineer. If you're a girl, you become a doctor. Life was so much simpler. Now you have, being trying to be an influencer. Then you have to choose whether you want a YouTube influencer, whether you are face. And then look at how what youngsters are doing, standing on traffic, railway, lines, trying to do funny things, trying to increase. The pressure of existence has become higher. So that is why it is very important for individuals of any age, of any caste, gender, of anything, to be able to determine your delimiters. To what will you go and what will you not go beyond? Because when you do not have your delimiters or guardrails, then also you become vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability will be exploited by a criminal or criminal gang.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Okay. Okay. Any other question?
So labor is the primary kind of thing for any kind of trafficking.
Need not be. Sex is another big thing. In fact, till now, it was always presumed that sex trafficking was the largest, or the sexual exploitation was the largest industry. More often later, it is now being determined that labor seems to have overtaken, because the demand, everybody wants cheap stuff. Now, where will the cheap stuff come? How much you can push down the wages? Then obviously you start using slaves. So
Labor
we
in
are.
labor in
Sorry?
the sense I'm talking about work, sir. So work is related. I mean, trafficking is related to work, and vice versa.
What
So
do you?
if somebody wants to have some work, they are vulnerable for trafficking.
Correct. But again, the point is, a person wants work, uh, 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 can be vulnerable for labor trafficking, can also be vulnerable for sex trafficking. The
Yes,
work,
yes,
if that work is related to subsistence in terms of poverty, socio-economic markers, then that person becomes vulnerable.
yes.
But Sanjeev, today, even a higher class person getting desperate for, let's say, I'm a higher class individual and I have this great desire to want to go to America for work because it brings a status elevation. Now I'm vulnerable,
Yes.
because I will do just about anything to try and go. What those people who have been deported back and who went through a smuggled route actually were desperate.
Yes.
Because of various reasons. Now, if we do some research and find out what were the reasons, there could be various reasons.
Sir.
And in fact, we have seen education actually gets people to do more migration, because now once you are educated, you are aware about what are the various routes and what all you can do.
Yes, sir.
So it need not be economic vulnerability for migration. Actually, once you become economic well off, then you are also migrating.
Sir.
Okay.
Sir. So
Any other?
Sir, it is all interlinked actually.
It is all interlinked. And that is why we study all these in a interdisciplinary approach.
Yes, sir.
Ek minute. Domingos says, why do many victims of trafficking remain invisible or silent even when help is available? They don't share experience. Domingos, it's stigma. Think about, and for example, for men, imagine having to say that you were made a fool. Think about the fact that many a times when we purchase things and we are made a fool, or we are given a short change, we do not want to share that because it makes us look foolish. So there is a stigma, one. Then there is a real fear of retribution. The traffickers are criminal gangs. They know where you are. They know your families. They can do harm. It is in so many cases, people who, for example, there are cyber frauds. You have hardly heard people talking about cyber fraud. There is shame involved. Okay, I have been robbed.
Yeah, right, sir.
There is stigma attached. There is fear. In trafficking,
Yeah.
there is an actual fear, because remember, a vulnerable person more often than not comes from a poor socioeconomic condition, and from an area from where the trafficker comes in. The trafficker knows that person.
Yes. So one thing I know also, I'm receiving many people at embassy, people who is the one of this company of recruitment, like agencies.
Huh.
So they are coming to embassy. Like I have electricians, plumber, people to go to Mozambique, like for manpower for work.
Oh, okay.
So last time when someone contacted the embassy, we request them to send the legal documents for the
Correct.
company also.
Correct.
But I know that we have many companies doing this kind of job. This also is not a risk for the government, for the people. How do the government work with these companies, these agencies of recruitment? Yes, maybe we can also do some work for these people
Correct. And
to
Domingos,
control them.
it
Yes,
also possible that these recruitment agencies might be doing indirect routes to take people somewhere else.
yes, yes.
So yes, at each stage you need to do your due diligence, because you do not know what the other person is actually planning.
Yes, because men of these times they are being on passports, photos. We don't know who is going,
Correct.
where
Correct.
is living. Yeah, sometimes it's risk also for us. Give him visa, go to Mozambique. We don't know if he's going for Horn or someone is pushing him
Correct.
to Mozambique.
Correct.
Yes,
Correct. Correct.
and there are
Correct.
many agents doing this work, and sometimes it's not good also.
Correct.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
So that's also, as I said, all of you can answer your questions based on your experience too. So
Yes, sir.
experience.
Right.
So your questions can be answered based out of experience. You can actually write your experience without giving specific instances. That way, you will be able to complete an answer and do your paper.
Right, sir. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other question? Okay. In case there is none, I wish you all the best for your June examinations. I think the date sheet is out. As I said, keep it simple, keep those keywords in, and typically craft your answer accordingly.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Bye, guys. All the best. See you then.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, sir.
Bye-bye.